Hello, everyone. And again, we're going to be continuing with Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49 on Chapter 5. Let's begin. Though her next move should have been to contact Randolph Triblett again, she decided instead to drive up to Berkeley. She wanted to find out where Richard Wharfinger had got his information about Tristero. Possibly also take a look at how the inventor John Nefastus picked up his mail. As with Mucho when she'd left Kinneret, Metzger did not seem desperate at her going. She debated, driving north, whether to stop off at home on the way to Berkeley or coming back. Turned out she missed the exit to Kinneret, and that solved it. She purred along to the east side of the bay, presently climbed into the Berkeley hills, and arrived close to midnight at a sprawling, many-leveled German Baroque hotel, carpeted in deep green, going in for curved corridors and ornamental chandeliers. A sign in the lobby said, "Welcome, California Chapter, American Deaf-Mute Assembly." Every light in the place burned, alarmingly bright. A truly ponderable silence occupied the building. A clerk popped up from behind the desk, where he'd been sleeping, and began making sign language at her. Oedipa considered giving him the finger to see what would happen, but she'd driven straight through, and all at once the fatigue of it all had caught up with her. The clerk took her to a room with a reproduction of a Remedios Varo in it, though through corridors gently curving as the streets of San Narciso, utterly silent. She fell asleep almost at once, but kept waking from a nightmare about something in a mirror across from her bed. Nothing specific, only a possibility, nothing she could see. When she finally did settle into sleep, she dreamed that Mucho, her husband, was making love to her on a soft white beach that was not part of any California she knew. When she woke in the morning, she was sitting bolt upright, staring into the mirror at her own exhausted face. She found the lectern press at a small office building on Shattuck Avenue. They didn't have plays of Ford, Webster, Tournier, and Wharfinger on the premises, but did take her check for $12.50, gave her the address of their warehouse in Oakland, and a receipt to show the people there. By the time she collected the book, it was afternoon. She skimmed through to find the line that had brought her all the way there, and in the leaf-lectured sunlight froze. "No hallowed skein of stars can ward, I trow," ran the couplet. "Who once has crossed the lusts of Angelo?" "No," she protested aloud. "Who's been set this tryst with Tristero?" The penciled note in the paperback had mentioned a variant, but the paperback was supposed to be a straight reprint of the book she now held. Puzzled, she saw that this edition also had a footnote. According only to the quarto edition, 1687, the earthier folio had a lead inserted where the closing line should have been. D'Amico has suggested that Wharfinger may have made a libelous comparison involving someone at court, and that the later restoration was actually the work of the printer Inigo Barfstable. The doubtful Whitechapel version has this Tristor odious awry, O Nicolo, which, besides bringing in a quite graceless Alexandrine, is difficult to make sense of syntactically, unless we accept the rather unorthodox, though persuasive argument of J.K. Sale, that the line is really a pun on this Tristero Desiree. This, however, it must be pointed out, leaves the line nearly as corrupt as before, owing to no clear meaning for the word Tristero, unless it be a pseudo-Italianate variant on Triste, meaning wretched or depraved. But the Whitechapel edition, besides being a fragment, abounds in such corrupt and probably spurious lines, as we have mentioned elsewhere, and is hardly to be trusted. Where Oedipa wondered, does the paperback I bought at Zapp's get off with its Tristero line? Was there yet another edition besides the quarto, folio, and Whitechapel fragment? The editor's preface, signed at this time by one Emery Bortz, professor of English at Cal, mentioned none. She spent nearly an hour more searching through all the footnotes, finding nothing. "Ah, damn it," she yelled. started the car and headed for the Berkeley campus to find Professor Bortz. She should have remembered the date of the book, 1957, Another World. The girl in the English office informed Oedipa that Professor Bortz was no longer with the faculty. He was teaching at San Narciso College, San Narciso, California. Of course, Oedipa thought. Right. Why, where else? She copied the address and walked away, trying to remember who'd put out the paperback. She couldn't. It was summer, a weekday in mid-afternoon. No time for any campus Oedipa knew of to be jumping, yet this one was. The time down slow from Wheeler Hall through Sather Gate into a plaza teeming with corduroy, denim, bare legs, blonde hair, horn rims, bicycle spokes in the sun, book bags, swaying card tables, long paper petitions dangling to earth, posters for undecipherable FSMs, YAFs, VDCs, suds in the fountain, students at nose-to-nose dialogue. She moved through it, carrying her fat book, attracted, unsure, a stranger, wanting to feel relevant, but knowing how much of a search among alternate universes it would take. For she had undergone her own educating at a time of nerves, blandness, and retreat among not only her fellow students, but also most of the visible structure around and ahead of them, this having been a national reflex to certain pathologies in high places only death had the power to cure. And this Berkeley was like no somnolent swash out of her own past at all, but more akin to those Far Eastern or Latin American universities you read about, those autonomous culture media where the most beloved of folklores may be brought into doubt, cataclysmic of dissents voiced, suicidal of commitments chosen, the sort that bring governments down. But it was English she was hearing as she crossed Bancroft Way among the blonde children and the muttering Hondas and Suzukis. American English. Where were Secretaries James and Foster and Senator Joseph, those dear daft Numia who'd mothered over Oedipa's so temperate youth? In another world, along another pattern of track, another string of decisions taken, switches closed, the faceless pointsman who'd thrown them, now all transferred, deserted in stir, fleeing the skip tracers out of their skull on horse, alcoholic, fanatic, under aliases dead, impossible to find ever again. Among them they had managed to turn the young Oedipa into a rare creature indeed, unfit perhaps for marches and sit-ins, but just a whiz at pursuing strange words and Jacobean texts. She pulled the Impala into a gas station somewhere along the gray stretch of the Telegraph Avenue, and found in a phone book the address of John Nefastus. She then drove to a pseudo-Mexican apartment house, looked for his name among the U.S. mailboxes, ascended outside steps, and walked down a row of draped houses till she found his door. He had a crew cut and the same underage look as Kotex, but wore a shirt in various Polynesian themes and dating from the Truman administration. Introducing herself, she invoked the name of Stanley Kotex. He said you could tell me whether or not I'm a sensitive. Nefastus had been watching on his TV set a bunch of kids dancing around some kind of Watusi. I like to watch young stuff, he explained. There's something about a little chick that age. So does my husband, she said. I understand. John Nefastus beamed at her, simpatico, and brought out his machine from a workroom in back. It looked about the way the patent had described it. You know how this works? Stanley gave me a kind of a rundown. He began then, bewilderingly, to talk about something called entropy. The word bothered him as much as Tristro bothered Oedipa, but it was too technical for her. She did gather that there were two distinct kinds of this entropy, one having to do with heat engines, the other to do with communication. The equation for one, back in the 30s, had looked very like the equation for the other. It was a coincidence. The two fields were entirely unconnected, except at one point, Maxwell's demon. As the demon sat and sorted his molecules into hot and cold, the system was said to lose entropy, but somehow the loss was offset by the information the demon gained about what molecules were where. Communication is the key, cried Nefastus. The demon passes this data on to the sensitive, and the sensitive must reply in kind. There are untold billions of molecules in that box. The demon collects data on each and every one. At some deep psychic level he must get through. The sensitive must receive that staggering set of energies and feed back something like the same quantity of information to keep it all cycling. On the secular level, all we can see is one piston, hopefully moving. One little movement against all that massive complex of information, destroyed over and over with each power stroke. Help, said Oedipa, you're not reaching me. Entropy is a figure of speech, then, sighed Nephastus. A metaphor. It connects the world of thermodynamics to the world of information flow. The machine uses both. The demon makes the metaphor, but not only verbally graceful, but also objectively true. But what? She felt like some kind of a heretic. If the demon exists only because the two equations look alike, because of the metaphor? Nephastus smiled, impenetrable, calm, a believer. He existed for Clerk Maxwell long before the days of the metaphor. But had Clerk Maxwell been such a fanatic about his demon's reality? He looked at the picture in the outside of the box. Clerk Maxwell was in profile and would not meet her eyes. The forehead was round and smooth, and there was a curious bump at the back of his head covered by curling hair. His visible eye seemed mild and noncommittal, but Oedipa wondered what hang-ups, crises, spookings in the middle of the night might be developed from the shadowed subtleties of his mouth, hidden under a full beard. Watch the picture, said Nephastus, and concentrate on a cylinder. Don't worry, if you're sensitive, you'll know which one. Leave your mind open, receptive to the demon's message. I'll be back. He turned to his TV set, which was now showing cartoons. Oedipa sat through 2 Yogi Bears, 1 Magilla Gorilla, and a Peter-Potamus, staring at Clerk Maxwell's enigmatic profile, waiting for the demon to communicate. Are you there, little fellow? Oedipa asked the demon. Or is Nephastus putting me on? Unless a piston moved, she'd never know. Clerk Maxwell's hands were cropped out of the photograph. He might have been holding a book. He gazed away into some vista of Victorian England, whose light had been lost forever. Oedipa's anxiety grew. It seemed, behind his beard, he'd begun ever so faintly to smile. Something in his eyes certainly had changed. And there, at the top edge of what she could see, hadn't the right-hand piston moved a fraction? She couldn't look directly. The instructions were to keep her eyes on Clerk Maxwell. Minutes passed. Pistons remained frozen in place. High-pitched, comic voices issued from the TV set. She had seen only a retinal twitch, a misfired nerve cell. Did the true sensitive see more? In her colon now she was afraid, growing more so that nothing would happen. Why worry, she worried. Nephastus is a nut. Forget it. A sincere nut. The true sensitive is the one that can share in the man's hallucinations, that's all. How wonderful they might be to share. For 15 minutes more she tried, repeating, If you're there, whatever you are, show yourself to me. I need you, show yourself. But nothing happened. I'm sorry, she called in, surprisingly, about to cry with frustration, her voice breaking. It's no use. Nephastus came to her and put an arm around her shoulders. It's okay, he said. Please don't cry. Come on in. Come on in on the couch. The news will be in any minute. We could do it there. It? Oedipa said Oedipa. Do it? What? Have sexual intercourse, replied Nephastus. Maybe there'll be something about China tonight. I like to do it while they talk about Vietnam. But China is best of all. You think about it, all those Chinese teeming, that profusion of life. It makes it sexier, right? Gah! Oedipa screamed and fled, Nephastus snapping his fingers through the dark rooms behind her in a hippy-dippy, oh, go ahead then, chick fashion he had doubtless learned from watching the TV also. Say hello to old Stanley, he called as she pattered down the steps onto the street, flung a babushka over her license plate, and screeched away down the telegraph. She drove more or less automatically until a swift boy in a Mustang, perhaps unable to contain the new sense of virility his auto gave him, nearly killed her, and she realized that she was on the freeway, heading irreversibly for the Bay Bridge. It was the middle of rush hour. Oedipa was appalled at the spectacle, having thought such traffic only possible in Los Angeles, places like that. Looking down at San Francisco, a few minutes later from the high point in the bridge's arc, she saw smog. Haze, she corrected herself, is what it is. Haze. How can they have smog in San Francisco? Smog, according to folklore, did not begin till further south. It had to be at the angle of the sun. Amid the exhaust, sweat, glare, and ill humor of a summer evening on an American freeway, Oedipa Maz pondered her Tristero problem, and the silence of San Narciso, the calm surface of the motel pool, the contemplative contours of residential streets like rakings in the sand of a Japanese garden, had not allowed her to think as leisurely as this freeway madness. For John Nephastus, to take a recent example, two kinds of entropy, thermodynamic and informational, happened. Say by coincidence to look alike, when you wrote them down as equations. Yet he had made his mere coincidence respectable with the help of Maxwell's demon. Now here is Oedipa, faced with the metaphor of God knew how many parts, more than two anyway, with coincidences blossoming these days wherever she looked. She had nothing but a sound, a word, tristero, to hold them together. She knew a few things about it. It had opposed the Thurn and Taxis postal system in Europe. Its symbol was a muted post horn. Sometime before 1853, it had appeared in America and fought the Pony Express in Wells Fargo, either as outlaws in black or disguised as Indians, and it survived today in California, serving as a channel of communication for those of unorthodox sexual persuasion, inventors who believed in the reality of Maxwell's demon, possibly her own husband, Mucho Mas, but she'd thrown Mucho's letter long away. There was no way for Genghis Khan to check the stamp. So if she wanted to find out for sure, she'd have to ask Mucho himself. Either Tristero did exist in its own right, or was being presumed, perhaps fantasied by Oedipa, so hung up and interpenetrated with the dead man's estate. Here in San Francisco, away from all tangible assets of that estate, there might still be a chance of getting the whole thing to go away and disintegrate quietly. She had only to drift tonight at random and watch nothing happen, to be convinced it was purely nervous, a little something for her shrink to fix. She got off the freeway in North Beach, drove around, parked finally at a steep, straight side street among the warehouses, then walked along Broadway into the first crowds of that evening. But it took her no more than an hour to catch sight of a muted post horn. She was moseying along the street, full of aging boys in Ruth Atkins suits, when she collided with a gang of guided tourists come rowdy-dowding out of a Volkswagen bus, en route to take on a few San Francisco night spots. "Let me say this on you," a voice spoke into her ear, "because I had just left," and she found, being deftly pinned outboard of one breast, this big cerise ID badge, reading, "Hi, my name is Arnold Snarb, and I'm looking for a good time." Oedipa glanced around and saw a cherubic face vanishing with a wink in among natural shoulders and striped shirts, and away went Arnold Snarb, looking for a better time. Somebody blew on an athletic whistle, and Oedipa found herself being herded along with the other badged citizens toward a bar called the Greek Way. Oh no, Oedipa thought, not a fag joint, no. And for a moment she tried to fight out of the human surge before recalling just how she had decided to drift tonight. Now in here, their guide, sweating dark tentacles to his tab collar, briefed them. "You're gonna see members of the third sex, the lavender crowd the city by the bay is so justly famous for. To some of you, the experience might seem a little queer, but remember, try not to act like a bunch of tourists. If you get propositioned, it'll all be in fun, just part of the gay nightlife to be found around here in the famous North Beach. 2 drinks, and when you hear the whistle, it means out. On the double, regroup right here. If you're well behaved, we'll hit Finocchio's next." He blew a whistle twice, and the tourist, breaking into a yell, swept Oedipa inside in a frenzied assault on the bar. When things had calmed, she was just near the door with an unidentifiable drink in her fist, jammed against somebody tall in a suede sport coat, in the lapel of which she spied, wrought exquisitely in some pale, glimmering alloy, not another cerise badge, but a pin in the shape of the Tristero post horn, mute and everything. "All right," she told herself, "you lose. A game try, all 1 hour's worth." She could have left then and gone back to Berkeley, to the hotel, but couldn't. "What if I told you," she addressed the owner of the pin, "that I was an agent of Thurn and Taxis?" "What?" he answered. "Some theatrical agency?" He had large ears, hair cropped nearly to his scalp, acne on his face, and curiously empty eyes, which now swiveled briefly to Oedipa's breasts. "How'd you get a name like Arnold Snarb?" If you tell me where you got your lapel pin," said Oedipa. "Sorry." She sought to bug him. "If it's a homosexual sign or something, it doesn't bother me. Eyes showing nothing. I don't swing that way," he said. "Yours either." Turned his back on her and ordered a drink. Oedipa took off her badge, put it in an ashtray, and said quietly, trying not to suggest hysteria, "Look, You have to help me, because I really think I'm going out of my head. You have the wrong outfit, Arnold. Talk to your clergyman. I use the U.S. mail because I was never taught any different, she pleaded. But I'm not your enemy. I don't want to be. What about my friend? He came spinning around in the stool to face her again. You want to be that, Arnold? I don't know, she thought she'd better say. He looked at her blank. What do you know? She told him everything. Why not? Held nothing back. At the end of it, the tourist had been whistled away, and he'd brought 2 rounds to Oedipus III. I heard about Kirby, he said. It's a code name. Nobody real, but none of the rest. You're Sinophile across the bay, or that sick play. I never thought there was a history to it. I think of nothing but, she said, and a little plaintive. And, scratching the stubble on his head, you have nobody else to tell this to? Only somebody in a bar whose name you don't know? She wouldn't look at him. I guess not. No husband, no shrink. Both, Oedipus said, but they don't know. You can't tell them? She met his eyes void for a second after all, and shrugged. I'll tell you what I know, then, he decided. The pin I'm wearing means I'm a member of the IA. That's Inamorati Anonymous. An inamorado is somebody in love. That's the worst addiction of all. Somebody's about to fall in love, Oedipus said. You go sit with them or something. Right. The whole idea is to get to where you don't need it. I was lucky. I kicked it young. But there are 60-year-old men, believe it or not, and women even older who wake up in the night screaming. You hold meetings then, like the AA? No, of course not. You get a phone number, an answering service you can call. Nobody knows anyone else's name, just the number in case it gets so bad you can't handle it alone. We're isolates, Arnold. Meetings would destroy the whole point of it. But what about the person who comes to sit with you? Suppose you fall in love with them. They go away, he said. You never see them twice. The answering service dispatches them, and they're careful not to have any repeats. How did the post horn come in? That went back to their founding. In the early 60s, a Yoyodyne executive living near L.A. and located someplace in the corporate root system above supervisor but below vice president found himself, at age 39, automated out of a job. Having been since age 7 rigidly instructed in an eschatology that pointed nowhere but to a presidency and death, trained to do absolutely nothing but sign his name to specialized memoranda, and he would not begin to understand and take blame for the running amok of specialized programs that failed for specialized reasons he had to have explained to him. The executive's first thoughts were naturally of suicide, but previous training got the better of him. He could not make the decision without first hearing the ideas of a committee. He placed an ad in the personal column of the LA Times asking whether anyone who'd been up for the same fix had ever found any good reasons for not committing suicide. His shrewd assumption being that no suicides would reply, leaving him automatically with only valid inputs. This assumption was false. After a week of anxiously watching the mailbox through little Japanese binoculars his wife had given him as a going-away present, she left him the day after he was pink-slipped, and getting nothing but sucker list stuff through the regular deliveries that came each noon, he was jolted out of a boozy black-and-white dream of jumping off the stack into a rush-hour traffic by an insistent banging at the door. It was late on a Sunday afternoon. He opened the door and found an aged bum with a knitted watch cap in his head and a hook for a hand, who presented him with a bundle of letters and loped away without a word. Most of the letters were from suicides who had failed, either through clumsiness or last-minute cowardice. None of them, however, could offer any compelling reasons for staying alive. Still, the executive dithered, spent another week with pieces of paper on which he would list, in columns headed pro and con, reasons for and against taking his Brody. He found it impossible, in the absence of some trigger, to come to any clear decision. Finally, one day he noticed a front-page story on the Times, complete with an AP wire photo about a Buddhist monk in Vietnam who had set himself on fire to protest government policies. Groovy, cried the executive. He went to the garage, siphoned all the gasoline from his Buick's tank, put on his green Zachary all-suit with the vest, stuffed all his letters from unsuccessful suicides into the coat pocket, went to the kitchen, sat on the floor, proceeded to douse himself good with gasoline. He was about to make the firewell flick of the wheel when his faithful Zippo, which had seen him through the Normandy hedgerows, the Ardennes, Germany, and post-war America, when he heard a key in the front door and voices. It was his wife and some man, whom he soon recognized as the very efficiency expert at Yoyodyne who'd caused him to be replaced by an IBM 7094. Intrigued by the irony of it, he sat in the kitchen and listened, leaving his necktie dipped in the gasoline as some sort of wick. From what he could gather, the efficiency expert wished to have sexual intercourse with the wife on the Moroccan rug in the living room. The wife was not unwilling. The executive heard lewd laughter, zippers, and the thump of shoes, heavy breathing, moans. He took his tie out of the gasoline and started to snicker. He closed the top on his Zippo. "I hear laughing," his wife said presently. "I smell gasoline." And said the efficiency expert. Hand in hand, naked, the two proceeded to the kitchen. "I was about to do a Buddhist monk thing," explained the executive. "Nearly 3 weeks it takes him." Nearly 3 weeks it takes him, marveled the efficiency expert, "to decide. You know how long it would have taken the IBM 7094? 12 microseconds. No wonder you were replaced." The executive threw back his head and laughed for a solid 10 minutes, along toward the middle of which his wife and her friend, alarmed, retired, got dressed, and went out looking for the police. The executive undressed, showering, and hung his suit out on the line to dry. Then he noticed a curious thing. The stamps on some of his letters in his suit pocket had turned almost white. He realized that the gasoline must have dissolved the printing ink. Idly, he peeled off a stamp and saw suddenly the image of a muted post horn, the skin of his hand showing clearly through the watermark. "A sign," he whispered, "is what it is." If he'd been a religious man, he would have fallen to his knees. And it was, he only declared with great solemnity, "My big mistake was love. From this day I swear to stay off of love. Hetero, homo, bi, dog or cat, car, every kind there is. I will found a society of isolates dedicated to this purpose, and this sign, revealed by the same gasoline that almost destroyed me, will be its emblem." And he did. Oedipa, by now rather drunk, said, "Where is he now?" "He's anonymous," said the anonymous inamorado. Why not write to him through your waste system? Say, founder, IA. "But I don't know how to use it," she said. "Think of it," he went on, also drunk. "A whole underworld of suicides who failed, all keeping in touch with that secret delivery system. What do they tell each other?" He shook his head, smiling, stumbled off his stool, and headed off to take a leak, disappearing into that dense crowd. He didn't come back. Oedipa sat, feeling as alone as she ever had, now the only woman she saw in a room full of drunken male homosexuals. "Story of my life," she thought. "Mucho won't talk to me. Hilarius won't listen. Clerk Maxwell didn't even look at me. And this group, God knows." Despair came over her. And it will when nobody around has any sexual relevance to you. She gauged the spectrum of feeling out there as running from really violent hate, an Indian-looking kid hardly out of his teens, with frosted shoulder-length hair tucked behind his ears and pointy cowboy boots, to dry speculation, a horn-rimmed SS type who stared at her legs, trying to figure out if she was in drag. None of which would do her any good. So she got up after a while and left the Greek way and entered the city again, the infected city, and spent the rest of the night finding the image of the Tristero post horn. In Chinatown, on the dark window of the herbalist, she thought she saw it on a sign among ideographs, but the streetlight was dim. Later, on a sidewalk, she saw 2 of them in chalk, 20 feet apart. Between them, a complicated array of boxes, some with letters, some with numbers. A kid's game? Places on a map? Dates with a secret history? She copied the diagram in her memo book. When she looked up, a man, perhaps a man, in a black suit, was standing in a doorway half a block away, watching her. She thought she saw a turned-around collar, but took no chances. Headed back the way she came, pulse thundering. A bus stopped at the next corner, and she ran to catch it. She stayed with buses after that, getting off only now and then to walk so she'd keep awake. What fragments of dreams had to do with the post horn. Later, possibly, she would have trouble sorting the night into real and dreamed. At some indefinite passage in a night's sonorous score, it also came to her that she would be safe, that something, perhaps only her linearly fading drunkenness, would protect her. The city was hers, as made up with sleeked so with the customary words and images, cosmopolitan, culture, cable cars, it had not been before. She had safe passages tonight to its far-blood's branchings, be they capillaries too small for more than peering into, or vessels mashed together in some shameless municipal hickeys out on the skin for all but tourists to see. Nothing but the light could nothing of the nights could touch her. Nothing did. The repetition of symbols was to be enough, without trauma as well, perhaps, to attenuate it, or to even jar it altogether, loose from her memory. She was meant to remember. She faced that possibility that she might the Toy Street from a high balcony, roller coaster ride, feeding time among the beasts in the zoo. Any death wish that can be consummated by some minimum gesture. She touched the edge of its voluptuous field, knowing it would be lovely beyond dreams simply to submit to it. That not gravity's pull, laws of ballistics, feral ravening promised more delight. She tested it, shivering. I am meant to remember. Each clue that comes is supposed to have its own clarity, its fine chances for performance. But then she wondered if the gem-like clues were only some kind of compensation to make up for having lost the direct epileptic word, the cry that might abolish the night. In the Golden Gate Park, she came on a circle of children in their nightclothes who told her that they were dreaming the gathering, but that the dream was really no different from being awake, because in the mornings when they got up they felt tired, as if they'd been up most of the night. When their mothers thought they were out playing, they were really curled up in cupboards of their neighbors' houses, in platforms of trees, in secretly hollowed nests inside hedges, sleeping, making up for these hours. The night was empty of all terror for them. They had inside their circle an imaginary fire, and needed nothing but their own unpenetrated sense of community. They knew about the post horn, but nothing of the chalked game Oedipa had seen on the sidewalk. You used only one image, and it was a jump rope game, a little girl explained. You stepped alternately in the loop, the bell, and the mute, while your girlfriend sang, Tristo, Tristo, 1, 2, 3, turning taxi from across the sea. Third in Texas, you mean? They'd never heard it that way. Went on warming their hands at the invisible fire. Oedipa, to retaliate, stopped believing in them. In an all-night Mexican greasy spoon off 24th, she found a piece of her past in the form of one Jesús Arrabal, who was sitting at a corner of at a TV set, idly stirring his bowl of opaque soup with the foot of a chicken. Hey, he greeted Oedipa. You are the lady in Mazatlan. He beckoned her to sit. You remember everything, Oedipa said. Jesus, even tourists. How's your CIA? Standing not in the agency you think, but for a clandestine Mexican outfit known as the Conjuración de los Insurgentes Anarquistas, traceable back to the time of the Flores Magón brothers, and later briefly allied with Zapata. You see, in exile, waving his arm around the place, he was part owner here at the Yucateco, who still believed in the revolution, their revolution. And you, are you still with that gringo who spent too much money on you? The oligarchist, the miracle? He died. Ah, poor Seito. They had met Jesús Arrabal on the beach, where he had previously announced an anti-government rally. Nobody had showed up, so he fell to talking to Inverarity, the enemy he must, to be true to his faith, learn. Pierce, because of his neutral manners and the presence of ill will, had nothing to tell Arrabal. He played the rich, obnoxious gringo so perfectly that Oedipa had seen goose flesh come up along the anarchist's forearms, due to no Pacific Sea breeze. Soon as Pierce went off to sport in the surf, Arrabal asked her if he was real or a spy or making fun of him. Oedipa didn't understand. You know what a miracle is? Not what Bakunin said, but another world's intrusion into this one. Most of the time we coexist peacefully, but when we do touch, there's cataclysm. Like the church we hate, anarchists also believe in another world, where revolutions break out spontaneous and leaderless, and the soul's talent for consensus allows the masses to work together without effort, automatic as the body itself. And yet, Senya, if any of it should ever really happen that perfectly, I would also have to cry miracle, an anarchist miracle, like your friend. He is too exactly and without flaw the thing we fight. In Mexico, the privilegiado is always, to a finite percentage, redeemed, one of the people, unmiraculous. But your friend, unless he's joking, is as terrifying to me as a virgin appearing to an Indian. In the years intervening, Oedipa had remembered Jesus because he'd seen that about Pierce, and she hadn't. As if he were, in some unsexual way, competition. Now, drinking thick, lukewarm coffee from a clay pot in the back burner of a Yucateco's stove and listening to Jesus talk conspiracy, she wondered if, without the miracle of Pierce to reassure him, Jesus might not have quit his CIA eventually and gone over, like everybody else, to the majority priestess, and so never had to go into exile. The dead man, like Maxwell's demon, was the linking feature in a coincidence. Without him, neither she nor Jesus would be exactly here, exactly now. It was enough, a coded warning. What tonight was chance. So her eyes did fall presently onto an ancient rolled copy of an anarcho-syndicalist paper, Regeneration. The night was 1904, and there was no stamp next to the cancellation, only the hand-struck image of the post horn. They arrive, said Arrabal. Have they been in the mails that long? Has my name been substituted for that of a member who's died? Has it really taken 60 years? Is it a reprint? Idle questions. I am a foot soldier. The higher levels have their reasons. She carried this thought back to her back into the night with her. Down at the city beach, long after the pizza stands and rides had closed, she walked unmolested through a drifting, dreamy cloud of delinquents in summer weight gang jackets, with the post horn stitched on in thread that looked like pure silver in what moonlight there was. They had all been smoking, snuffing, or injecting something, and perhaps did not see her at all. Riding among an exhausted bus full of Negroes going on in graveyard shifts all over the day, she saw scratched in the back of a seat, shining, for her, the brilliant, smoky interior, the post horn with the legend Death. But unlike Waste, somebody had troubled to write in pencil, "Don't ever antagonize the horn." Somewhere, near Fillmore, she found the symbol tacked to the bulletin board of a laundromat, among other scraps of paper offering cheap ironing and babysitters. If you know what this means, the note said, you know where to find out more. Around her, the odor of chlorine bleach rose heavenward like an incense. Machines chugged and sloshed fiercely. Except for Oedipa, the place was deserted, and the fluorescent bulbs seemed to shriek whiteness, to which everything in the light touched was dedicated. It was a Negro neighborhood. Was the horn so dedicated? Would it antagonize the horn to ask? Who could she ask? All the buses all night she listened to transistor radios playing songs in the lower stretches of the top 200 that would never become popular, whose melodies and lyrics would perish if they had never been sung. A Mexican girl, trying to hear one of those through snarling static from the bus's motor, hummed along as if she would remember it always, tracing post horns and hearts with a fingernail, in the haze of her breath on the window. Out at the airport, Oedipa, feeling invisible, eavesdropped on a poker game whose steady loser encountered each loss neat and conscientious with a little balance book decorated inside with scrawled post horns. I'm averaging a 99.375% return, fellas, she heard him say. The others, strangers, looked at him, some blank, some annoyed. That's averaging it out over 23 years, he went on, trying to smile. Always just that little percent on the wrong side of breaking even. 23 years, I'll never get ahead of it. Why don't I quit? Nobody's answering. In one of the latrines was an advertisement by AC/DC, standing for Alameda County Death Cult, along with the box number and post horn. Once a month they were to choose some victim from among the innocent, the virtuous, the socially integrated and well-adjusted, using him sexually, then sacrificing him. Oedipa did not copy the number. Catching a TWA flight to Miami was an uncoordinated boy who planned to slip at night into aquariums and open negotiations with the dolphins. Who would succeed, man? He was kissing his mother passionately goodbye, using his tongue. All right, Ma, he kept saying. Right by waist, she said. Remember, the government will open it if you use the other. The dolphins will be mad. I love you, Ma, he said. Love the dolphins, she advised him. Right by waist. So it went. Oedipa played the voyeur and listener. Among her other encounters were a facially deformed welder who cherished his ugliness, a child roaming the night who missed the death before birth, as certain outcasts do the dear lulling blankness of the community, a Negro woman who had intricately marbled scar along the baby fat of one cheek, who kept going through rituals of miscarriage, each for a different reason, deliberately as others might the ritual of birth, dedicated not to continuity, but to some kind of interregnum, an aging night watchman, nibbling at a bar of ivory soap, who had trained his virtuoso stomach to accept also lotions, air fresheners, fabrics, tobaccos, and waxes, in a hopeless attempt to assimilate it all the promise, productivity, betrayal, ulcers, before it was too late. And even another voyeur, who hung outside of the city's still-lighted windows, searching for one who knew that specific image. Decorating each alienation, each species of withdrawal, as cufflink, decal, aimless doodling, there was somehow always the post-horn. She grew so to expect it that perhaps she did not see it quite as often as she later was to remember seeing it. A couple 3 times would have been enough, or too much. She bus rode and walked on to the lightning morning, giving herself up to a fatalism rare for her. Where was the Oedipa who'd driven so bravely up here from San Narciso? That optimistic baby who had come on like the private eye in any long-ago radio drama, believing all you needed was grit, resourcefulness, exemption from hidebound cops' rules to solve any great mystery. But the private eye, sooner or later, was to get beat up on. That night's profusion of post horns, this malignant, deliberate replication, was their way of beating up. They knew her pressure points and the ganglia of her optimism, and one by one, pinch by precision pinch, they were immobilizing her. Last night, she might have wondered what undergrounds, apart from the couple she knew of, communicated by waste system. By sunrise, she could legitimately ask what undergrounds didn't. If miracles were, as Jesús Arrabal had postulated years ago on the beach at Mazatlan, intrusions into this world from another, a kiss of cosmic pool balls, then so must be each of the night's post horns. For here, where God knew how many citizens, deliberately choosing not to communicate by U.S. mail, it was not an act of treason, nor possibly even of defiance, but it was a calculated withdrawal from the life of the Republic, from its machinery. Whatever else was being denied them out of hate, indifference, or the power of their vote, loopholes, simple ignorance, this withdrawal was their own, unpublicized, private. Since they could not have withdrawn into a vacuum, could they? There had been to exist a separate, silent, unsuspected world. Just before the morning rush hour, she got out of a jitney whose engine driver ended each day with a red. Downtown on Howard Street, began to walk toward the Embarcadero. She knew she looked terrible, knuckles black with eyeliner and mascara from which she'd rubbed, mouth tasting of old booze and coffee. Through an open doorway on a stair leading up into the disinfectant-smelling twilight of a rooming house, she saw an old man huddled, shaking with grief she couldn't hear. Both hands, smoke-white, covered his face. In the back of the left hand, she made out the post horn tattooed with old ink, now beginning to blur and spread. Fascinated, she came to the windows and ascended creaking steps, hesitated on each one. When she was 3 steps from him, the hands flew apart, and his wrecked face and the terror of eyes gloried in burst veins stopped her. "Can I help?" She was shaking, tired. "My wife's in Fresno," he said. He wore an old double-breasted suit, frayed gray shirt, wide tie, no hat. "I left her so long ago, I don't remember. Now this is for her." He gave Oedipa a letter that looked like he'd been carrying it around for years. "Drop it in the..." And he held up the tattoo and stared into her eyes. "You know, I can't go out there. It's too far now. I had a bad night." "I know," she said, "but I'm new in town. I don't know where it is." "Under the freeway." He waved her in the direction she'd been going. "Always one. You'll see it." The eyes closed, cammed each night out of the safe furrow of the bulk of the city's waking each sunrise again, set virtuously to plowing. What rich soils had he turned? What concentric planets uncovered? What voices overheard? Flenders of luminescent gods glimpsed among the wallpaper's stained foliage. Candle stubs lit to rotate in the air above him, prefiguring the cigarette he or a friend must fall asleep every day smoking. Thus, to end among the flaming, secret salts, had all those years by the insatiable stuffing of a mattress that would keep vestiges of every nightmare sweat, helpless overflowing bladder, viciously, tearfully consummated wet dream, like the memory bank to a computer of the lost. She was overcome all at once by a need to touch him, as if she could not believe in him or would not remember him without it. Exhausted, hardly knowing what she was doing, she came to the last 3 steps and sat, took the man in the arms, actually held him, gazing out of her smudged eyes down the stairs, back into the morning. She felt witness against her breast, and saw he was crying again. He hardly breathed, but tears came up as being pumped. "I can't help," she whispered, rocking him. "I can't help." It was already too many miles to Fresno. "Is that him?" a voice asked behind her, up the stairs. "The sailor? He has a tattoo on his hand. Can you bring him up okay? That's him." She turned and saw an even older man, shorter, wearing a tall Homburg hat and smiling at them. "I'd help, but I got a little arthritis." "Does he have to come up?" she said. "Up there?" "Where else, lady?" She didn't know. She let go of him for a moment, reluctant as if it were her own child, and he looked up at her. "Come on," she said. He reached out a tattooed hand, and she took that, and that was how they went the rest of the way up that flight, and then there were 2 more, hand in hand, very slowly for the man with arthritis. "She disappeared last night," he told her. "Said she was going looking for this old lady. It's a thing he does, off and went." They entered a warren of rooms and corridors lit by 10-watt bulbs, separated by beaver-board partitions. Mule and man followed them stiffly. At last he said, "Here." At the little room where another suit. In the little room were little suit, a couple of religious tracts, a rug, a chair, a picture of a saint changing well water to oil for Jerusalem's Easter lamps. Another bulb, dead, the bed, the mattress, waiting. She ran through then a scene she might play. She might find the landlord of this place and bring him to court, and buy the sailor a new set of Roos Atkins, and shirt and shoes, and give him the bus fare to Fresno after all. But with a sigh she had released her hand. While she was so lost in the fantasy that she hadn't felt it go away, as if he'd known the best moment to let go. "Just mail the letter," he said. "The stamp is on it." She looked and saw the familiar carmine 8-cent airmail with the jet flying by the Capitol dome. At the top of the dome stood a tiny figure in deep black with its arms outstretched. Oedipa wasn't sure exactly what was supposed to be on top of the Capitol, but knew it wasn't anything like that. "Please," the sailor said. "Go on now. You don't want to stay here." She looked in her purse, found a 10 and a single. Give him the 10. "I'll spend it on booze," he said. "Remember your friend," said the arthritic, watching the 10. "Bitch," said the sailor. "Why didn't you wait till he was gone?" Oedipa, watching him make adjustments so he'd fit easier against the mattress, that stuffed memory, register A. "Give me a cigarette, Ramirez," the sailor said. "I know you got one." "Would it be today?" "Ramirez," she cried. The arthritic one looked around with his rusty neck. "He's going to die," she said. "Who isn't?" said Ramirez. She remembered John the Fastest, talk about his medicine and massive destructions of information. So when this mattress flared up around the sailor, and his Viking's funeral, the stored, coded years of uselessness, near early death, self-harrowing, the sure decay of hope, instead of all men who had slept on it, whatever their lives had been, would truly cease to be, forever, when the mattress burned. She stared at it in wonder. It was as if she had just discovered the irreversible process. It astonished her to think that so much could be lost, even in the quantity of hallucination belonging just to the sailor that the world would bear no further trace of. She knew, because she had helped him, that he suffered DTs. Behind the initials was a metaphor. A delirium tremens, a trembling unfurrowing of the mind's plowshare. The saint whose water can light lamps, the clairvoyant whose lapse and recall is the breath of God, the true paranoid for whom all is organized in spheres joyful or threatening about the central pulse of himself, the dreamer whose puns probe ancient fetid shafts and tunnels of truth all act in the same special relevance to one word, or whatever that is the word is, or whatever it is the word is there, buffering to protect us from. The active metaphor, then, was a thrust at truth and a lie, depending where you were, inside, safe, or outside, lost. Oedipa did not know where she was. Trembling, unfurrowed, she slipped sidewise, screeching back across grooves of years, to hear again the earnest, high voice of her second or third collegiate love rake glozing, bitching among us, and the syncopated tugging of a cavity about his freshman calculus. DT, God help this old tattooed man, meant to also be a time differential, a vanishingly small instant in which change had to be confronted at last for what it was, where it could no longer disguise itself as something innocuous like an average rate, where velocity dwelled in the projectile though the projectile be frozen at mid-flight, where death dwelled in the cell, though the cell looked to be on its most quick. She knew that the sailor had seen worlds no other man had seen, if only because there was that high magic to low puns, because DTs must give access to DTs of spectra beyond the known sun, music made purely of Antarctic loneliness and fright, but nothing, she knew, would preserve them or him. She gave him goodbye, walked downstairs, and then on, in the direction he'd told her. For an hour she prowled among the sunless concrete underpinnings of the freeway, finding drunks, bums, pedestrians, pederasts, hookers, walking psychotic, no secret mailbox. But, at last, the shadows she did come on a can with a swinging trapezoidal top, the kind you throw trash in, old and green, nearly 4 feet high. On the swinging part were hand-painted the initials W-A-S-T-E. She had to look closely to see the periods between the letters. Oedipa settled back in the shadow of the column. She may have dozed off. She woke to see a kid dropping a bundle of letters inside the can. She went over and dropped the sailor's letter to Fresno, then hid again and waited. Toward midday, a rangy young wino showed up with a sack, unlocked the panel at the side of the box, and took out all the letters. Oedipa gave herself half a block's start, then began to tail him. Congratulating herself on having thought to wear flats, at least, the carrier led her across the market, then over toward City Hall. In a street close enough to the drab, stone openness of the Civic Center to be infected by its gray, he rendezvoused with another carrier, and they exchanged sacks. Oedipa decided to stick with the one she'd been following. She tailed him all the way back with the littered, shifty, loud length of Market, and over on First Street to the Transbay bus terminal where he bought a ticket for Oakland. So did Oedipa. They rode over the bridge and into the great, empty glare of the Oakland afternoon. The landscape lost all variety. The carrier got off at a neighborhood Oedipa couldn't identify. She followed him for hours along streets whose names she never knew, across arterials that, even with the afternoon's lull, nearly murdered her, into slums and out, up along hillsides jammed solid with 2 or 3 bedroom houses, all their windows giving blankly back only the sun. One by one his sack letters emptied. At length he climbed onto a Berkeley bus. Oedipa followed. Halfway up Telegraph to the carrier got off and led her down the street to a pseudo-Mexican apartment house. Not once had he looked behind him. John Nefastus lived here. He was back where he'd started and could not believe 24 hours had passed. Should it have been more or less? Back in the hotel, she found a lobby full of deaf-mute delegates in party hats, copied in crepe paper after the fur Chinese communist jobs made popular during the Korean conflict. They were every one of them drunk, and a few of the men grabbed her, thinking to bring her along to a party in the grand ballroom. She tried to struggle out of the silent, gesturing swarm, but was too weak. Her legs ached, her mouth tasted terrible. They swept on to the ballroom, where she was seized about by the waist by a handsome young man in a Harris tweed coat, and waltzed round and round, through the rustling, shuffling hush, under a great unlit chandelier. Each couple on the floor danced whatever was in the fellow's head. Tango, two-step, bossa nova, slop. But how long, Oedipa thought, could it go on before collisions became a serious hindrance? There would have to be collisions. The only alternative was some unthinkable order of music, many rhythms, all keys at once, a choreography in which people meshed easy, predestined. Everything they all heard with an extra sense atrophied in herself. She followed her partner's lead, limp in the young mute's clasp, waiting for the collisions to begin, but none came. She danced for half an hour before, by mysterious consensus, everybody took a break, without having felt any touch but the touch of her partner. Jesús Arrabal would have called it an anarchist miracle. Oedipa, with no name for it, was only demoralized. She curtsied and fled. Next day, after 12 hours of sleep and no dreams to speak of, Oedipa checked out of the hotel room and drove down the peninsula to Kinneret. She had decided en route, with some time to think about the day preceding, to go see Dr. Hilarius, her shrink, and tell him all. She might well be in the cold and sweatless meat hooks of a psychosis. With her own eyes, she had verified a waste system, seen 2 waste postmen, a waste mailbox, waste stamps, waste cancellations, and the image of the muted post horn all but saturating the Bay Area. Yet she wanted it all to be fantasy, some clear result of her several wounds, needs, dark troubles. She wanted Hilarius to tell her that she was some kind of a nut and needed a rest, and that there was no Trastero. She also wanted to know why the chance of it being real should menace her so. She pulled into the drive at Hilarius's clinic a little after sunset. The light in his office didn't seem to be on. Eucalyptus branches blew in a great stream of air that flowed downhill, sucked to the evening sea. Halfway along the flagstone path, she was startled by an insect whirring loudly past her ear, followed at once by the sound of a gunshot. That was no insect, thought Oedipa, at which point, hearing another shot, she made the connection. In a fading light, she was a clear target. The only way to go was toward the clinic. She dashed up the glass doors, found them locked, the lobby inside dark. Oedipa picked up a rock next to a flower bed and heaved it at one of the doors. It bounced off. She was looking around for another rock when a white shape appeared inside, fluttering up to the door and unlocking it for her. It was Helga Blam, Hilarius's sometime assistant. "Hurry," she chattered as Oedipa slipped inside. The woman was close to hysterical. "What's happening?" Oedipa said. "He's gone crazy. I tried to call the police, but he took a chair and smashed the switchboard with it." "Dr. Hilarius?" "He thinks someone's after him." Tear streaks had meandered down the nurse's cheekbones. "He's locked himself in the office with that rifle. A Gewehr 43 from the war." Oedipa recalled that he kept as a souvenir. "He shot at me. Do you think anybody will report it?" "Well, he shot at half a dozen people," replied Nurse Blam, leading Oedipa down a corridor to her office. "Somebody better report it." Oedipa noticed that the window opened in a safe line of retreat. "You could have run," she said. Blam, running hot water from a wash basin taps into cups and stirring an instant coffee, looked up quizzical. "He might need somebody." "Who's supposed to be after him?" "3 men with submachine guns," he said. "Terrorists, fanatics. That's all I got. He started breaking up the PBX. He gave Oedipa a hostile look. "Too many nutty broads. That's what did it. Kinneret is full of nothing but. He couldn't cope." "I've been away for a while," Oedipa said. "Maybe I should find out what it is. Maybe I'd be less of a threat for him." Blam burned her mouth on the coffee. "Start telling him your troubles and he'll probably shoot you." In front of his door, which she could never remember having seen closed, Oedipa stood hip-shot a while, questioning her own sanity. Why hadn't she split out through Blam's window and read about the rest of it in the paper? "Who is it?" Hilarius screamed, having picked up her breathing or something. "Miss Maz." "May Spear and his ministry of cretins rot eternally in hell. Do you realize that half these rounds are duds?" "May I come in? Could we talk?" "I'm sure you'd all like that," Hilarius said. "I'm unarmed. You can frisk me." "While you karate chop me in the spine? No, thank you." "Why are you resisting every suggestion I make?" "Listen," Hilarius said after a while. Have I seemed Have I seemed to you a good enough Freudian? Have I ever deviated seriously? He made faces now and then, said Oedipa, but that's a minor. The response was a long, bitter laugh. Oedipa waited. I tried, the shrink behind the door said, to submit myself to the man, to the ghost of that cantankerous Jew. Tried to cultivate a faith in the literal truth of everything he wrote, even the idiocies and contradictions. It was the least I could have done. Ne croire, a kind of penance. And part of me must have really wanted to believe, like a child hearing in perfect safety a tale of horror, that the unconscious would be like any other room, once the light was let in, that those dark shapes would resolve only into toy horses and Biedermeier furniture. That therapy could tame it all after all, bring it into society with no fear of it someday reverting. I wanted to believe, despite everything my life had been. Can you imagine? She could not. Having no idea what Hilarius had done before showing up in Kinneret. Far away, she now heard sirens, the electronic kind the local cops used, that sounded like a slide whistle being played over a PA system. With linear obstinacy, they grew louder. Yes, I hear them, Hilarius said. Do you think anyone could protect me from these fanatics? They walk through walls, they replicate, you flee them, turn a corner, and there they are, coming for you again. Do me a favor, Oedipa said. Don't shoot at the cops. They're on our side. They're on your side. Your Israeli has access to every uniform known, Hilarius said. I can't guarantee the safety of the police. You couldn't guarantee where they'd take me if I were surrendered, could you? She heard him pacing around his office. Unearthly siren sounds converged on them from all over the night. There is a face, Hilarius said, that I can make. One you haven't seen. No one in this country has. I've only made it once in my life, and perhaps today, in Central Europe, there it still lives, in whatever vegetable ruin, the young man who saw it. He would be by now about your age, hopelessly insane. His name was Zvi. Will you tell the police, or whatever they're calling themselves tonight, that I can make that face again? That it was an effective radius of 100 yards and drives anyone unlucky enough to see it down forever into the darkened oubliette among the terrible shapes and obscures the hatch irrevocably above them. Thank you. The sirens had reached the front of the clinic. She heard car doors slamming, cops yelling. Suddenly a great smash as they broke in. The office door opened then. Hilarius grabbed her by the wrist, pulled her inside, and locked the door again. So now I'm a hostage, Oedipa said. Oh, said Hilarius, it's you. Well, who do you think you'd bet? Discussing my case with another. There's me. There are the others, with the LSD. We're finding the distinction begins to vanish. Egos lose their sharp edges. But I never took the drug. I chose to remain in a relative paranoia, where at least I know who I am and who the others are. Perhaps that is why you also refuse to participate, Miss Maz. He held the rifle to sling arms and beamed at her. Well then, you are supposed to deliver a message to me, I assume, from them. What are you supposed to say? Oedipa shrugged. Face up to your social responsibilities, she suggested. Accept the reality principle. You're outnumbered, and they have superior firepower. Ah, outnumbered. We were outnumbered there, too. He watched with a coy look. Where? Where I made that face. Where I did my internship. She knew then approximately what he was talking about, but had to narrow it, said, Where again? Buchenwald, replied Hilarius. Cops began hammering on the office door. He has a gun, Oedipa called, and I'm in here. Who are you, lady? She told him. How do you spell that first name? Also, he took down his address, age, phone number, next of kin, husband's occupation for the news media. Hilarius, all the while, was rummaging in his desk for more ammo. Can you talk him out of there? The cop wanted to know. TV folks would like to get some footage through the window. Could you keep him occupied? Hang tough, Oedipa advised. We'll see. Nice act you all have there, nodded Hilarius. You think, said Oedipa, then that they're trying to bring you back to Israel to stand trial like they did to Eichmann? The shrink kept nodding. Why? What did you do at Buchenwald? I worked, Hilarius told her, on experimentally induced insanity. A catatonic Jew was as good as a dead one. Liberal SS circles felt it to be more humane, so they had gone at their subjects with metronomes, serpents, Brechtian vignettes at midnight, surgical removal of certain glands, magic lantern hallucinations, new drugs, threats recited over hidden loudspeakers, hypnotism, clocks that ran backward, and faces. Hilarius had been put in charge of faces. The Allied liberators, he reminisced, arrived, unfortunately, before we could gather enough data. Apart from the spectacular successes like Svi, there wasn't much we could point to in a statistical way. He smiled at the expression on her face. Yes, you hate me, but didn't I try to atone? If I'd been a real Nazi, I'd have chosen Jung, nicht wahr? But I chose Freud instead, the Jew. Freud's vision of the world had no Buchenwalds in it. Buchenwald, according to Freud, once the light was let in, would become a soccer field. Fat children would learn flower arranging and solfeggio in the strangling rooms. At Auschwitz, the ovens would be converted over petite fours and wedding cakes. And the V-2 missiles to public housing for the elves. I tried to believe it all. I slept 3 hours a night trying to dream, and spent the other 21 at the forcible acquisition of faith. And yet my penance hasn't been enough. They've come like angels of death to get me, despite all I tried to do. How's it going? The cop inquired. Just Marv, said Oedipa. I'll let you know if it's hopeless. Then she saw that Hilarius had left the gayware on the desk and was across the room, ostensibly trying to open a file cabinet. She picked the rifle up, pointed it at him, and said, I ought to kill you. She knew he had wanted her to get the weapon. Isn't that what you've been sent to do? He crossed and uncrossed his eyes at her, stuck out his tongue tentatively. I came, she said, hoping you would talk me out of a fantasy. Cherish it, cried Hilarius fiercely. What else do any of you have? Hold it tightly by its little tentacle. Don't let the Freudians coax it away, or the pharmacists poison it out of you. Whatever it is, hold it dear. For when you lose it, you go over by that much to the others. You begin to cease to be. Come on in, Oedipa yelled. Tears sprang from Hilarius's eyes. You aren't going to shoot? The cop tried the door. It's locked, hey, he said. Bust it down, roared Oedipa, and Hitler Hilarius here will foot the bill. Outside, as a number of nervous patrolmen approached Hilarius, holding up straitjackets and billy clubs they would not need, as the three rival ambulances backed snarling up into the lawn, jockeying for position, causing Helga Blam, between sobs, to call the drivers filthy names. Oedipa spotted among the searchlights the staring crowds a KCUF mobile unit with her husband Mucho inside it, spieling into a microphone. She moseyed over past snapping flash bulbs and stuck her head into the window. Hi. Mucho pressed his cough button a moment, but only smiled. It seemed odd. How could they hear a smile? Oedipa got in, trying not to make a noise. Mucho thrust the mic in front of her, mumbling, You're on, just be yourself. Then, in his earnest broadcasting voice, How do you feel about this terrible thing? Not terrible, said Oedipa. Wonderful, said Mucho. He had her go on to give listeners a summary of what had happened in the office. Thank you, Miss Edna Mosh, he wrapped up, for your eyewitness account of this dramatic siege at the Hilarius psychiatric clinic. This is the KCUF Mobile 2, sending it now to Rabbit Warren at the studio. He cut his power. Something was not quite right. Edna Mosh, Oedipa said. It'll come out the right way, Mucho said. I was allowing for a distortion on these rigs, and then when they put it on tape. Where are they taking him? Community hospital, I guess, Mucho said. For observation. I wonder what they can observe. Israelis, Oedipa said. Coming in the windows. If there aren't any, he's crazy. Cops came over and they chatted a while. They told her to stay around Kinneret in case there was legal action. At length, she returned to her rented car and followed Mucho back to the studio. Tonight, he had a 1 to 6 shift on the air. In the hallway outside the loud, ratcheting teletype room, Mucho upstairs in the office typing out his story, Oedipa encountered the program director, Caesar Funch. Sure glad you're back, he greeted her, clearly at a loss for a first name. Oh, said Oedipa. Why's that? Frankly, confided Funch, since you left, Wendell hasn't been himself. And who? said Oedipa, working herself into a rage because Funch was right. Pray has he been, Ringo Starr? Funch cowered. Chubby checker? She pursued him to the lobby. The Righteous Brothers? And tell me why. And why tell me? All of the above, said Funch, seeking to hide his head. Mrs. Moz. Oh, call me Edna. What do you mean? Behind his back, Funch was whining. They're calling him the Brothers N. He's losing his identity, Edna. How else can I put it? Day to day, Wendell is less himself and more generic. He enters a staff meeting and the room is suddenly full of people, you know? He's a walking assembly of man. It's your imagination, Oedipus said. You've been smoking those cigarettes without printing on them again. You'll see. Don't mock me. We have to stick together. Who else worries about him? She sat alone with the bench outside Studio A, listening to Mucho's colleague Rabbit Warren spin records. Mucho came downstairs carrying his copy, a serenity about him she'd never seen. He used to hunch his shoulders and have a rapid eye blink rate, and both now were gone. Wait, he smiled and dwindled down the hall. She scrutinized him from behind, trying to see iridences, auras. She had some time before he was on. They drove downtown to a pizzeria and bar and faced each other through the fluted gold lens of a beer pitcher. How are you getting on with Metzger, he said. There's nothing, she said. Not anymore, at least, said Mucho. I could tell that when you were talking into the mic. Hey, that's pretty good, Oedipus said. She couldn't figure out the expression on his face. It's extraordinary, said Mucho. Everything's been... Wait, listen. She heard nothing unusual. There were 17 violins on that cut. Mucho said, and one of them, I can't tell where he was because it's monaural in here. Damn. It dawned on her that he was talking about the music. He had been seeping in its subliminal, unidentifiable way since they'd entered the place. All strings, reeds, muted brass. What is it? She said, feeling anxious. His E string, Mucho said. It's a few cycles sharp. He can't be a studio musician. Do you think somebody could let the dinosaur bone bit with one string, Ed? With just the set string of notes on that cut, figure out what his ear is like. Then with the musculature of his hands and arms, and eventually the entire man. God, wouldn't that be wonderful? Why should you want to? He was real. That wasn't synthetic. They could dispense live musicians if they wanted. Put together all the right overtones and the right power levels, and it'd come out like a violin. He hesitated before breaking into a radiant smile. You'll think I'm crazy, Ed, but I can do the same thing in reverse. Listen to anything and take it apart again. Spectrum analysis in my head. I can break down chords and timbres, and words, too, into all the basic frequencies and harmonics with all their different loudnesses, and listen to them, each pure tone, but all at once. How can you do that? It's like I have a separate channel for each one, Mucho said, excited. And if I need more, I just expand, add on what I need. I don't know how it works, but lately I can do it with people talking, too. Say, rich chocolatey goodness. Rich chocolatey goodness, said Oedipa. Yes, said Mucho, and fell silent. Well, what? Oedipa asked after several minutes with an edge to her voice. I noticed it the other night, hearing Rabbit do a commercial. No matter who's talking, the different power spectra are the same, give or take a small percentage. So you and Rabbit now have something in common now. More than that. Everybody who says the same words is the same person of the same of the spectra are the same only if they happen differently in time, you dig? But the time is arbitrary. You pick your 0 point anywhere you want, and that way you can shuffle each person's timeline sideways till they all coincide. Then you'd have this real big, God, maybe a couple 100 million chorus saying rich chocolatey goodness together, and it would all be the same voice. Mucho, she said, impatient but also flirting with a wild suspicion. Is this what Funch means when he says you're coming like a whole room full of people? That's why I am, said Mucho. Right, everybody is. He gazed at her, perhaps having had his vision of consensus as others do orgasms, face now smooth, amiable, at peace. She didn't know him. Panic started to climb out of a dark region of her mind. Whenever I put the headset on now, he'd continued, I really do understand what I find there. When those kids sing about she loves you, well, yeah, well, you know, she does. She's like any number of people all over the world, back through time, different colors, sizes, ages, shapes, distances from death, but she loves. And the you is everybody and herself. Oedipus, the human voice, it's a flipping miracle. His eyes brimming, reflecting the color of beer. Baby, she said, helpless, knowing of nothing she could do for this, and afraid for him. She put a little clear plastic bottle at the table between them. She stared at the pills inside it, then understood. That's LSD, she said. Mucho smiled back. Where'd you get it? Knowing. Hilarious. He broadened his program to include husbands. Look, then, Oedipus said, trying to be businesslike. How long has it been that you've been on this? He honestly couldn't remember. But there's a chance you're not addicted yet. Ed, looking at her puzzled, you don't get addicted. It's not like you're some hophead. You take it because it's good. Because you hear and see things, even smell them, taste like you never could, because the world is so abundant. No end to it, baby. You're an antenna, sending your pattern out across a million lives a night. And they're your lives, too. He had this patient, motherly look now. Oedipus wanted to hit him on the mouth. The song is not just that they say something. They are something, and the pure sound, something new. And in my dreams have changed. Oh, good-o. Flipping her hair a couple times, furious. No nightmares anymore? Fine. So your latest little friend, whoever she is, she really made out. At that age, they need all the sleep they can get. There's no girl, Ed. Let me tell you, the bad dream that I used to have all the time about the car lot, remember that? I couldn't even tell you about it. But I can now. It doesn't bother me anymore. It was only the sign on the lot. That's what scared me. On the dream, I'd be going about a normal day's business, and suddenly, without warning, there'd be a sign. We were a member of the National Automobile Dealers Association. Nada. Just this creaking metal sign that said nada, nada, against the blue sky. I used to wake up hollering. She remembered. Now he would never be spooked again. Not as long as he had the pills. She could not quite get it to her head. The day she left him for San Narciso was the day she'd seen Mucho for the last time. So much of him had already dissipated. Oh, listen, he was saying. Ed, dig. But she couldn't even tell what the tune was. When it was time for him to get back into the station, he nodded toward the pills. You could have those. She shook her head no. You're going back to San Narciso? Tonight? Yes. But the cops. I'll be a fugitive. Later, she couldn't remember if they'd said anything else. At the station, they kissed goodbye, all of them. As Mucho walked away, he was whistling something complicated. 12-tone. Oedipus sat with her forehead resting on the steering wheel and remembered that she hadn't asked him about the Tristero cancellation on his letter. But by then it was too late to make any difference. Thank you. That's the conclusion of Chapter 5.